I am absolutely delighted to introduce my guest today, Tony Award-winning orchestrator and 5-time Emmy Award-winning composer, Larry Hochman. As a co-orchestrator with Stephen Aramis on the Book of Mormon, Hochman has won the 2011 Tony Award for Best Orchestrations and also the 2011 Drama Desk Award. He has also been a 7-time Tony Award nominee for Best Orchestrations for productions such as A Class Act, the 2004 revival of Fiddler on the Roof, the Scottsboro Boys, Monty Python's Spamalot, Something Rotten, the 2016 revival of She Loves Me, and the 2017 revival of Hello, Dolly. As a composer, Hochman has written acclaimed works such as Songs of Freedom, American Dream, co-written with Larry Hochman, Shomer Yisrael, In Memoriam, Reason to be Thankful, and Meditation. He has also composed music with Mark Elliott for the original musical Perfect Life, based on the book by Larry Hochman, directed by Barbara Schuller. He has also orchestrated for numerous solo artists such as Sir Paul McCartney, Audra McDonald, Hugh Jackman, Brian Stokes Mitchell, Eric Idle, Barry Manilow, and many, many more. Additionally, Hochman has written numerous commercial jingles and provided orchestrations for 18 films. Larry, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Can I take you back to when you first started in music? You seem to be a very good sight reader. You have perfect pitch, took piano lessons, and you were quite a formidable pianist. Did you want to be a concert pianist at some point? And can you just describe how long were you taking piano lessons and who were your teachers growing up for, with just regarding the piano?
I started playing before I can remember, in that my parents told me later on that I was playing by ear on the nursery school piano when I was 4, and they were recommended by friends to provide lessons for me. So I did that when I went into kindergarten. I had my first piano teacher. That was Mrs. Batchelor. And my second piano teacher was not long after that. And I moved back into my hometown, and I reconnected with Irving Weinberg, who is still a good friend of mine locally. And that was, that's 60 years ago. So, but then I had piano lessons through all those years. Those years meaning when I was from when I was 5 until right into my second year of, well, actually all through my 4 years of college at Manhattan School of Music, Eastman School of Music, and Manhattan School of Music. So that's my piano lessons. You did ask me who the teachers were, so I want to give a shout out to Vincent Lenti at Eastman, and Isidore Freeman, my late. We lost him just a few years back. He was when I was a senior in high school, as well as Helen Lindsay, who we also lost along the way, and at Manhattan School, Mr. McLeod. I think it was George McLeod, who I want to make sure it's not George McFly. That's the character in Back to the Future. Right. George McLeod, rather. So those were all great teachers.
Now, were you a serious practicer, and how many hours did you practice a day? And was it all classical? Did you also you had good ears, did you play other styles of music growing up?
Well, I loved, as soon as the Beatles came out, I was playing rock and roll as much as I could. And I actually practiced my classical lessons as little as possible to get by. Okay. I got to be a good sight reader, but because of that, when I realized that the people that become concert pianists, because I learned how many hours a day they practiced. From a very early age, I totally gave up the idea that I could ever be a concert pianist. But happily, because my sight reading got to be very good, and then my interest in theater exploded from when friends of mine were into theater, and I discovered the whole theater scene when I was in high school, and Stephen Sondheim had just come on the scene then with Company and then Follies. So in my first real job at Summerstock, I got to be even a better sight reader, and I realized that I could be pretty much at home in a Broadway pit. So at that level, I was very good. But compared to the people, again, I ain't no Jean-Yves Thibaudet. There are people that play circles around me, and I just would not compete on that level. But compared to Broadway pianists in that day, I was pretty good. Yet, I will confess, there are some mighty good pianists that are now in the Broadway pits that I think are on a higher level of playing than when I played in the pits, which was in the 70s.
Now, you have perfect pitch. I'm always curious about people with perfect pitch. Do you have to ever train your ear, like with relative pitch? Did you have to study how chords move, or do you just hear it and you know the root motion moves from here to here?
Well, that's a great question. I actually had great ear training classes through my theory teacher, Ron Ackley, and at early on. But because I had theory at such an early age, I actually placed out of the theory courses once I was in college. So the answer is that perfect pitch is good for a starter, but certainly studying harmony and four-part harmony and chromatic harmony and really hearing the guts of a piece takes a lot of training and learning how to score read. Boy, I've never been asked that, but that's a fantastic question. But I'll throw in something very funny that I heard. I was a freshman at Eastman School of Music, and there were very talented composers in the freshman class as well as the other classes. And it was the first time I was at a composers forum, and I got to hear a piece that I had just written it at the end of high school. So that got played, and I heard a bunch of other pieces, as well as a couple of faculty pieces. Okay, so what I'm getting to is that a composition teacher, I should say a renowned composer who was one of the teachers, it was Warren Benson, and this is Rochester, and there was a Q&A afterwards, and someone asked Warren, some kid, who had a great ear and was already composing serial music, 12-tone music, and he asked him about the row, and he asked him, is it an inversion? And he asked him a very complex question, and Warren Benson just said, as a former percussionist, I've always felt that pitch is overrated.
Oh.
I just think it's hilarious.
You strike me as someone who's very driven to understand and driven to see the history of things and how they're placed and how things are done by the masters. Did you have that fire at an early age?
I actually more enjoy analyzing what someone else has done than having to think up ideas, which I find torturous. But that's where the important jobs are. So I have to do the work. But you're absolutely right. I love the puzzle and the analysis of it. But what I wanted to add on to the previous, you actually stumbled upon something, which is, though I have perfect pitch, I will say that vastly more important, is to hear relative pitch. It's the relation, it's the chords, it's the harmonic structure, whether you have an absolute certain place to start in your head without a starting pitch is, I think, much less important. On the other hand, I've only tried it this way, so I don't know how it would be without.
And did you always have it, or is it something people have claimed that you can train it? I've never met anyone who's learned it, but you've always had it from childhood?
Well, I don't know anyone that says that. I always had it. In fact, my friend reminds me that I once told him, when he asked me, what's it like to have perfect pitch? I said, what's it like to not have perfect pitch? But, as far as I can remember, I've always been able to, my teachers always remembered that I had perfect pitch before I can remember. So, and I don't know anyone that really has learned it, although certainly
neither have I, and I've been searching. Yeah,
I'm a guitarist. If he's going to start without a starting note to tune the high E string, chances are he's going to be within a half step or a whole step, or how far could you go? So, someone had called it a memory. You just remember what the pitches are, and we all remember from a few seconds to the next, or a minute to the next, or and I remember it from one day to the next, but I don't know that that's the type of memory. I think it really is on an absolute scale. In fact, if Diane doesn't mind, I'm going to mention that we have observed that she has perfect color pitch, and I know that that's an actual thing. She could go in and without a swatch and look at 40 shades of white to paint a room, and she'll remember exactly what shade to go for. And I swear that even if she weren't in the vicinity, I would have thought of exactly that example.
Let me ask you a little bit about your study of the great scores and that kind of thing. So you mentioned that you have a massive collection of classical scores and scores and a record collection.
I spent all my money for years on records. I didn't realize it'd be free eventually.
You mentioned the Walter Piston Book of Orchestration as influential on you in your understanding and taking it to the next level. Let's describe, how did you digest that book?
Well, it was recommended to me by our choral teacher in senior high school. He had that book and he lent it to me. Now, I knew that there was a book written by Rimsky-Korsakov, which I read later. I now know that there are other really good books that have been recommended, but I can't compare them because I've only read the Piston. And I will tell, it was a fascinating read, and he breaks down every instrument and has printed examples from the literature. And you're encouraged to get to listen to those pieces and to look at the examples, and I did just that. What might be interesting is that this was while I was in high school, and I started to collect one score after another of pieces that I loved. The first four scores I bought I found them difficult to read, and then I realized that they were some of the most complicated pieces. I started off with Zarathustra and The Rite of Spring, and I said, boy, this stuff is really hard. Well, compared to that, most other things are easy, with the exception of things like Luciano Berio and Ives' Fourth Symphony. But I did, so I started my collection, but I was saying that, so an interesting thing is that I had absolutely no intention that I would be doing this as my livelihood. And in fact, the more I thought about it and the more I heard about the time pressures that an orchestrator is under, and what sounds they come up with just out of their head, I was absolutely convinced that this was just a hobby of reading scores, and never dreamed that I would be doing this. I did a couple of small arrangements. I even arranged my own musical, but it never led to me considering myself an orchestrator. Not until I was given the task of writing an overture for a night with Sigmund Romberg, which toured New York State, and that was when I was 20, maybe 22. And I heard it back, I heard the rehearsal and thought, boy, I actually could do this. And then it all changed.
You have a massive record collection, and I get a sense, now I'm a musician myself, but I think for non-musicians, when you use the word listening, I think a musician uses that word a little bit differently than a non-musician. For instance, a non-musician might put on something on Spotify and then do their laundry. But for you, as a really professional, top-of-the-top musician, what is the definition of listening to you? When you're listening to something, what are you looking out for?
Boy, that's interesting. I haven't really... in a way, I have thought about it, but I never thought about how to answer that as a question. But I think here it is. Sometimes I listen. Well, when I first hear a piece, and let's say it's on the radio, and I've actively wanted to hear the piece as opposed to it just being on in the background. I just go with the gut. I want to kind of make a decision whether I like it or not, and of course that may change when I hear it a second time. But I just go with where it takes me emotionally and whether I enjoy the ride. And I'm listening for, I react to color, and I react to beautiful harmonies in a way more than I do melody. But still, I get an overall impression of the piece, and I don't mean in any analytical way. I just either like it or I don't. And then the pieces that I'm more fascinated by, then I'll want to follow it with the score, and many times the score is not published or not available, and I'll just listen, again and again, without looking at anything. But now I'm really listening to what are those harmonies? What is the form of a piece is so elusive, and I feel like in my old age now, I'm just starting to understand a lot more about form, thanks to my reviewing an old text written by my professor Douglas Green form in tonal music, and I'm just I feel like I'm back in sophomore theory class, getting a whole underground view again, and it's making a lot more sense. But as I say, so first I get my reaction is on a gut level, an emotional level, and then it's certainly on the second and third times that I'm really listening for those details.
You've listened to so much and you've analyzed so much. Does it get faster and faster for you? So, like, for instance, you've looked at Ravel, Wagner, Strauss, Debussy. When you've looked at one, does that really amplify your speed at looking at others? Do you feel like you can really break down a new score that you look at very quickly?
Oh, yeah. It's much different. I mean, now I can, I remember the first time I decided I was going to really look note for note and read every note of a piece that I knew, which was the Tchaikovsky violin concerto. I remember driving up with my brother on a ski trip, and I was reading. I mean, I would look at every note on every page and try to find the logic of every note. In my head, I was explaining to myself why it was there, and it does all add up. I mean, Tchaikovsky is just so sound. I mean, every note really does have its place. Where was I going with this? So that took a while, and now I could visit the same score and go through it much quicker, and I see the patterns, and I'm a much faster reader now. And I also find I was talking to some students at one point, and I said, before I start to arrange a piece, the very first thing I would do before I even think about what colors or what the solutions of texture are is I want to make sure I understand everything about the piece harmonically, melodically, and the form of it. And that, when let's say I'm working on a new song in a musical, it may only take me 10 minutes. I might play through it one time or listen to it one time and then read through it slowly, maybe once, and feel like I really have that understanding of the tonal centers and where the progressions are. And if there's some unusual harmony, I'll slow down and make sure I understand that. And then I start to think about dramatically and make sure I feel that I have a connection to what's going on character-wise and story-wise. But all of that, these days, maybe because I've run out of time and the deadlines are so, but all of that might take me, I mean, it could take me an hour, but it could also take me 10 minutes. And then the rest of it is the toil of putting the notes on the page.
Everybody likens Ravel to like a Swiss watch. He's very slick. Everything's in the right place. And what is your take on supposedly clunky orchestration? Like I'll give you an example. Rimsky-Korsakov redid Night on Bald Mountain by Mussorgsky, and for a long time people took that as the definitive version. And then people started to look at Mussorgsky's original orchestration, and they were starting to appreciate his, I guess, not as slick, not as smooth as Korsakov, but that it had a little bit of a raw edge. How do you strike that balance between something that's super slick and something that has a bit of a raw, not so refined orchestration?
Well, actually, you got me very curious, because I know that I happen to know the Mussorgsky piece very well, and I know it only from the Rimsky-Korsakov version. I've never heard the Mussorgsky's original. You remind me of something that my orchestration teacher, Nicholas Flagello, said in class one day. He said the Met spent all this money on recopying this newly found manuscript of Boris Godunov. And we're talking about the same scenario. He says they've been playing the Rimsky-Korsakov all these years. And he said now they found the golden treasure. He said, but they were wrong. He said that piece was not secret. People have had it the whole time, and they just haven't played it because, and this is Nicholas Flagello talking, he says it just wasn't very good orchestration. Getting back to your question, I'll tell you, when I write, sometimes I really go for that bold stroke, and sometimes the absolute perfect balance of whether there's 5 violins against 3 or whether it's 5 against 4 isn't as important as getting the broad stroke. But I find when orchestration is clumsy to a degree where one texture is is so busy and in the same register as another, and you start to hear each one less clearly together. That to me is not the right way to go. And I don't, it may be bold and aggressive and unusual, but if there isn't transparency, and I think that's the way Piston would put it in his book, it's sometimes you just need the separation of timbre or register or both. Well, for instance, let's say there are two elements going on. Let's say one's the main theme and the other is a counter. Often, and this is true in big band music also, often one will be a single melody and the other will be harmonized. And when you start to harmonize both, and they're certainly you'd want them in different registers, but it works. I mean, I like to have if something has a thick harmony and there's some other element going on, I find that the unison will work better. So maybe I think that's along the lines of what we're talking about.
You mentioned big band. No one's asked you in interviews that I've seen, but are you a fan of jazz in any way?
I don't have the ability to do that single line improv. So I've never been in a jazz group. I'm not a good improviser. I mean, harmonically, yes, but not melodically. I find that there's plenty of jazz that I enjoy, but when it gets to a point where the focus seems to be on the virtuosity and how amazing it is that they're playing the amount of notes, but that the overall sound isn't so attractive, I'm not as interested. And also by nature of wanting to understand and put together, like a composition, that's where, and this is not a value judgment, but my own taste is where I'm controlling what the notes are rather than giving a skeleton onto which players would improvise. And again, I'm not, jazz is, I have the utmost respect and most admiration for the people that can do that, but I just can't. I've some success. The only successful jazz writing I've done has been where I've taken my time to explore the harmonies, and my style in that realm has been compared to Bill Evans, and I feel like I really understand the higher partials of jazz, complex jazz harmonies. But again, that improv that those cats do, I cannot.
Now, you said something that I found really interesting. You said your favorite tunes are ballads, and you could watch a Broadway show that is all ballads, and you'd have a good time.
I could.
I mean, the history of musical theater is so rich, and there's so many great shows. What are your favorite ballads? And when you're orchestrating a ballad or even composing a ballad, what are the things that give you goosebumps?
Well, when I'm orchestrating a ballad or any song, the first thing that happens is total panic and the total belief that I have no idea what I'm doing. And then I settle down and start to find some ideas. The ballads that I love, some are as simple and sweet as Irving Berlin from Annie Get Your Gun. There's one of my favorite songs is they say that I think the title is They Say It's Wonderful. They say that falling in love is wonderful is what the lyric is. And I got lost in his arms also from that same show. And right up through the Gershwin songs and right up through modern day, there are so many ballads that I love. And When You Wish Upon a Star and Over the Rainbow. But other scores that I love are, I mean, certainly there's fast and energetic music that I love, but those are probably less frequent. Something like the score of Sweeney Todd, West Side Story, those would always be, and Company. Top here, look at that. Sondheim's represented in every one of those.
Are slow songs harder to write or orchestrate than fast songs?
Actually, for me, they are. Sometimes if a song is rhythmic based, meaning like with a pop rhythm, sometimes all you have to do is set the texture and you find a couple of counter lines, and when the vocal has 3 beats rest, you put in a bop and a boop. I think I'm really oversimplifying that. There's really more to it than that. But somehow I actually get more scared of writing the more rhythmic songs. And then after I've done it, I realized how much easier it is. And the ballads I'm always plunging right into and looking forward to, and then finding that they're hard. Because, well, I guess always I want to make sure that the counterpoints aren't just thrown in, but the melody is king, and every counterpoint, in my mind, must serve the melody, must never get in the way. I told a student, not that I have a lot of students, but I remember saying this along the way, that when you find you're working with a given melody and you find a great counterline, and it kind of works, but a couple of notes aren't really ideal, but you think you'll get away with it. My advice is just work it a little bit. You'll find some other solution that goes perfectly. And I want to make sure that every counterpoint is right. And that step for me is before I even think of what instrument it will be. So I'm developing the texture and the overall harmony and making sure that the piece will be satisfying, and that every element supports the tune and the form. And then the next layer would be deciding what colors to use. And of course, in today's Broadway economy, let's say, the final step might be, okay, now that I know what colors I'd like to use, I only have 5 instruments, so how am I going to juggle them around and try to not have to leave out any notes out of necessity?
Now, Larry, you've been part of so many fantastic productions. Can I just rattle off a few names, and can you just give me a brief kind of thought on the ones that I mentioned? Just anything that comes to mind. I'm going to ask you, like, what was it like working on a class act, for instance?
Oh, sure. Class act. I have great memories of that. That was a wonderful show to work on. I didn't know Ed Kleban's music at all, and some of it was good, but a few pieces were exceptional. Paris Through a Window, I think is the title, is a beautiful song, as is the final number called Self-Portrait. But there was one piece that I had I'm very fond of this. It's the song called Better. Da 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 da. Late is boring. Try on time. I can't remember it offhand because I'm under pressure, but it's a wonderful song. And the scenario for my task on that song, I was working from what was essentially a graphic reproduction of the sheet music that's on sale, and it was melody with very simple accompaniment, and it went around several times as it modulated in the form of the staged piece, and I realized, well, this wasn't developed by a dance arranger, for instance. This wasn't a customized accompaniment, but it was so I went with what felt like, well, how you would say a generic accompaniment, and then I just had this impulse. It got to the 3rd time around, and I had already, this is after I had done a pencil. I marked up as if a sketch. And as I was putting to score paper, I had a whole other idea, and I thought to myself, this is not at all what's on the page, but I'm going to try it, because if they don't like it, I'll just rewrite it and put what's on the page, which would be a repeat of the first 2 verses. But again, this is verse 3, and the accompaniment was the same as verse 1 and verse 2. And instead of a kind of two-handed comping rhythm, I did a stop time in the mid and the bass with the chunk, 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 and the right hand was da, 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 and it was an entirely different texture, and I thought this is going to be really exciting, and I'll put in some. I reharmonized more complex, so that it was dum da dum da da ba 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 with the not your expected voice leadings and not expected chords. And in fact, if you were to put on the album of a class act and go to the third chorus, anyone would hear what I'm talking about. And they didn't. No one said anything. And I thought to myself, but this was one of my first shows for Broadway, and I thought, this is what it's like when the idea works, because everyone's busy with worrying about the problems, and if they don't say anything, that means it was fine. And also, I got the feeling that I wasn't there to try to figure out what they wanted. They came to me because they didn't know what it should sound like, but rather they trusted that I would find a solution. And again, I mean, no one said to me, "Oh, Larry, that's great," or "This is so different, and I didn't expect this." Nothing was said at all. But you can be sure that if it were not pleasing to Todd Ellison, the music director, or Lonnie Price, the director, both of whom are very good friends, or I mean, I say this with the highest regard, that if it were wrong, I would have heard about it and would have to rewrite it.
What's it like working with Marvin Hamlisch? And was that the first time you worked with him, or were there other times? Oh, you've worked with him quite a bit, right?
Well, actually, I worked with him only in the end of his life, and of course, we didn't know it was the end of his life.
He's a character, though, right? In the class act.
Yes, he is in there because it's about Ed Kleban, and Ed Kleban was a composer lyricist, but his history is that he got his success through his lyrics, and he not through his own choice, but he was the lyricist for Chorus Line and not the composer, and so there's a good portion of the show that's about Chorus Line, and yes, Marvin Hamlisch, it's about him there. Now I met Marvin briefly on some gig long ago, which doesn't really count. When I was recommended to him, really the first major project that I did for him was the film The Informant with Matt Damon. And out of the blue, I knew that a mutual friend who had conducted and contracted for him, Michael Keller, called me and I think he called me to say that he was recommending me to Marvin, and anyway, I got hired for that. So that I can tell you exactly when that recording session was, because it was the day that Barack Obama got elected. So I'll never forget November of 2008. So it was only between 2008 and 2012 when Marvin died that I worked with him. But he used after the Informant sessions, he consistently used me on 4 or 5 other projects, most of which were a one song or a medley, a recording of music in my mind for his autobiographical children's book. But the one of those after the Informant, the one that was a major project was The Nutty Professor, the musical. Which, in fact, he died during previews of that. That was in Nashville, and it was. I'll tell you, I was on edge because there was some wacky experience where I was under the impression that he kind of ditched me on a project, but I didn't know him, so I thought maybe that's just what he does, and I realized after the fact that he was just absent-minded and hadn't realized that
okay.
that there was a promise being made, because everything after that, from The Informant right on, was just delightful, and he was absolutely respectful. And I'll tell you, he was so funny. Okay, I just remembered. You'll like this. I'm at his Park Avenue apartment, penthouse, I should say, and it's 8 a.m, and his music editor is there, showing him running the on the laptop the visual, and he's going through this cue. He's playing it for me at the piano, and I'm taping it on my little MP3 recorder. And he had written a particular theme with a wanting a bass sax. Okay, so then we get to a different part of it, and something that's slightly reminiscent of that is in the left hand. And I didn't know if it was whether that was supposed to be bass sax also. And of course, you want to be sure about something like that. It's not. There's no two ways about it. It's either bass sax or no bass sax. So I just said, Marv, and this is. Again, this is very early on. I hardly knew him at all, and I'm just behaving myself like a good boy. And I said, Marvin, at the very end there, do you mean for this to be on bass sax? And he looks at me and he says, no bass sax. And he's playing piano and he's inventing a song at the moment, like a Kurt Weill song, because you have to pay tax.
It's amazing.
Just relax. And he's. I tell you, it was like
that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
It was right out of the Hollywood movies.
That's amazing.
And it was, and Missy Cohen was the music editor, and I remember Marvin was doing this with a straight face, and Missy and I were just cracking up.
I would fall apart if I saw that live. That would be ridiculous.
And I later learned that's very common for him to do at his own concerts. That he would
come up with stuff on the spot.
Improvise and improvise a lyric at the same time, and he would take somebody could whistle a theme and he could play it. Okay, this is Sondheim on a lazy day, and he said to me, "Oh yeah, you want to imitate?" He was tongue in cheek, but he said, "Here, if you want to imitate Sondheim, you always start with a vamp, and then the melody has to start in the oddest note in the scale."
Now you are so acclaimed, and a lot of young musicians must be very in awe of you. But did you have heroes that you really looked up to in the field of theater? Like, do you have like any idols that when you were young and you were growing up, did you look up to certain people?
Well, Stephen Sondheim would be the one as far as a composer, but as far as, well, let's see. At the point that I was interested in orchestration, Jonathan Tunick was top of the list. And then alongside,
why is he top of the list?
Well, and I was about to say, and then there's Ralph Burns and Billy Byers.
Okay.
But for my taste and what I had the most connection with, well, it was in those Sondheim scores of company and night music especially that I saw what the accompaniment was written, and without rewriting it, he found ways of of using color, and not so heavy layered, but and this you mentioned Ravel before, in the way that Ravel would find that clear color. Instead of using four woodwinds in unison, he'd use the oboe, or he'd use a solo cello, and then when it comes back the third time, it would be a bass clarinet instead, and some very subtle changes. And I'll tell you, I remember listening to the night music album for the first time, and the Night Waltz, not the Night Waltz 2, but yeah, I guess it is the Night Waltz, and the very beginning of the show was pretty amazing. And then on the trio, where it's all about the vocals, there's now, later, and soon. And there was a point in soon, and in fact, you know what? Since we're on audio, I'm going to dash up to the piano instead of me singing it. I'll just play what I'm talking about, because there's one particular moment, and I thought to myself, well, it's kind of a simple device, and the melody. The violins were playing with the melody, and then they, without warning, they leapt up an octave, into the higher range, just like you might have in some operetta or opera, and it was just thrilling. So, okay, Jonathan, if you're listening, forget what I said.
No, that was wonderful. I love that you played the piano.
Just have a corned beef sandwich.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, there were particular devices that I thought were just perfectly suited to the music. And now, Ralph Burns with Funny Girl, I had admiration for entirely other reasons. The excitement of the the xylophone or strings against a rhythm. So he's a shall I say a close second.
So those were people you looked up to, and you kind of when you were developing?
Yeah, and who knew that I'd become a friend of Jonathan Tunick? In fact, the second real job I had, maybe the first real job I had in New York, when I was in my 20s, I was the rehearsal pianist for Pacific Overtures. So it was very soon after I, thought of what I thought, the great Jonathan Tunick, and here I am 2 years after that, actually, seeing him every day.
I want to ask you more about your composing and see if I can flesh out more things. Especially, now you mentioned you composed 8 CDs of original music for, I think, the Carlin Recorded Library of Music.
Yes.
Now, that's a lot of music. Now, you mentioned you were emulating film music in a sense. So how long did it take for you to write that music, and what was the range of the styles that you covered?
Okay, well, the first time I got a call from this library, I was recommended by my late friend Eugene Sines, another composer who had declined to work for them. He just didn't feel the urge to write anymore. And this was for what some people call stock music and other people call library music. But for me, it was a great opportunity because I wrote music, and I don't think of it in terms of pigeonholing it into a level. It sometimes gets put down, but maybe that's why they've told me that my stock music is more successful than the average because it sounds like music.
Yep.
Well, I was asked to write. This was a library based in England, and they wanted the American sound. So I was the American guy for them, and I did an album of sports music and news music. And that was 1 CD's worth. It was about 20 themes with some cut-down versions, 30-second and 60-second versions for what they would call a jingle length. It was about 5 years after that they wanted American music, and Nick Farry's my friend, and I would talk and fax back and forth lists, and we realized very quickly that to get an array of American sounding music, it's not just 5 different things, it's not even 10 different things. We came up with a list of 70 different styles, and I tried to create one major theme for each, including a version of a reharmonization of Star Spangled Banner, and that was a small segment, but one was emulating Copland, one was writing in the style of Bernstein, like Cool from West Side Story, one was the Copland piece. One was like Rodeo, and on the list goes. I wrote a fife and drums piece. That was a 4 CD set. There was so much music, and my late friend Larry Gates, also a composer, he contributed a few themes as well. It was about 2 years after that they asked me to do a Hollywood CD, and that turned out to be a double album. First the earlier Hollywood, and then the later more TV Hollywood.
When do you work, actually? It's a strange question, but do you work in the mornings? Are you a late night person? When do you get most of your work done?
Great question. I'll tell you, I used to be the night owl. I would do a gig and have dinner and start working at 9 o'clock and work until 2 a.m. And that lasted up until I was I was in my late 30s. And at the point that I got married to my wife, Diane, and there were kids in the household. I mean, these were my stepkids, Brian and Sarah, and they were 7 years old. And all of a sudden I was on a school schedule. And at first, I swear that they thought there was something wrong with me, that I slept till 10. This was unheard of. Once I adjusted to their schedule, I found myself getting up at 6 and 7. And now, over the last 25 years, the time from 9 in the morning, well, it used to be 7 in the morning, and under pressure, at the end of a deadline, it could be 4 in the morning. But most often it's from 8, 9 in the morning until dinner is my best time. And in the evening, I might tinker, I might have some ideas, but I don't do much in the evening.
Here's a very, very general question for you. What is your approach to composition?
Ooh, fear, total fear, absolute terror would be a better way to describe it, especially if I'm composing for someone. If I'm composing for myself, then I find that when I get an idea, it's usually melody first, and that wasn't how it was when I was a composition student in college. But
By the way, what was your major in college?
Well, it was composition, and I studied with my composition teacher was Joseph Schwantner, Pulitzer Prize winner, great composer. as well as Benjamin Lee's. But I didn't find my voice there. I was disappointed in my own writing, more and more disappointed. And it was when I started to write songs about 3 years after college that I found what I would say to you is I really found where my voice is. And it usually happens when I've shut everything else out of my mind and I'm either singing to myself or accompanying myself on the piano. And it's not when I sit down. It never happens when I am in a room alone with paper and pencil. Somehow I get better ideas when I'm playing or singing. And it's not that I need the piano to write, but that is always the starting point. Because when I orchestrate, I don't use the piano at all.
Wow. So wait a second. Well, is that the perfect pitch thing? You can sit down and just kind of hear it in your head and write it down?
Well, I think all arrangers do that, though, whether perfect pitch or not. I know that Jonathan Tunick doesn't have perfect pitch, and by his own admission, I wouldn't know otherwise, except that I heard him say that, and he has no problem with sitting without a piano and writing. So, I mean, in other words, whether your internal sense of pitch is agreeing with piano with A440 is not the relevant issue.
Do you do that to avoid making your music sound like pianistic music?
Well, that's one thing, and you don't want to be. I mean, sometimes I work out counterpoints on the piano, and they come out differently because I'm really finding voices that just are. There's something about the melodies that when I'm playing it again, just like in composing, they end up more visceral. But when I'm orchestrating, I find if I just am playing on the piano, it would just sound plain. In fact, it's in a way it's the exact opposite of what I'm doing because I'm trying to add color. I also find that if on the rare times that someone says, would you use a synthesizer to try out the ideas? Well, synthesizer is it's if you want to make it sound bad. But if I'm expected to show an audio demo to someone like in a jingle, then I have to use a synthesizer. But that's a very sad day when that happens. And in theater, there's no time. There are never demos in theater. Film still use them, but so it just comes out better if I'm thinking abstractly on staff paper.
Now, when on the Wonder Pets, which you've won 5 Emmys for, is that the same kind of thing? Do you do it on pencil and paper?
Interesting. Some of the other composers actually worked right on computer and spit out a score as they went along. I never did that. I would work at the piano composing, and I would write it down with a pencil as I went along. And only at the very end, when the final step was to present a demo of my recorded voice and a proper MIDI sequence, I would then basically do a faithful execution of my written composition. But I didn't use synthesizer to compose. I did use piano to compose, and I would always be singing, and that definitely came out better than if I were to away from the piano to write.
It's amazing, the Wonder Pets, and it's no surprise that it's won so many awards because it's such a novel idea where you have such incredible music and you have it built around the music. Usually it's the reverse where the music comes after everything else. Could you describe working on that project, and can you talk about the workload? How much continuous music do you have to write?
10 minutes and 41 seconds.
Wow. Okay.
You've asked 2 questions, and they're both great questions. The easy question is about the schedule. They spread 40 15-minute episodes each, which is really 10 minutes and 40 seconds long. A year's worth there were 2 episodes back to back on 20 episodes, so there were 40 pieces that were 10 minutes long, and we had a year and a half to do them. Now, when it got to that point of once the pilot was approved, indeed, first of all, we brought in other composers. I wrote the main themes in my original pilot, but at that point, there was a separate orchestrator, a separate programmer, so my duty was just to compose. And I did about in the first season of 40 episodes, I think I did 14 of them. So it wasn't so crazy. Each episode, the deadline was tight, but I wasn't writing all the time. In fact, Spamalot came in between several episodes and that kind of thing. But I want to get back to your question was so smart as far as the format of the show. You're right that what was different about that show, and I know I've said this on other interviews, but it's so important because we kind of broke the rules. It might have been my suggestion, but I realized that the solution to what they wanted, which was, in Josh Selig's words, a child's idea of an opera, that I thought, let's do an entire piece of music on which the dialogue and action sits, so that my demo would be a continuous piece of 10 minutes of music, as opposed to other shows where you would only pre-score the segments where a character would sing and everything else would be done in post. In other words, a typical show you would record the dialogue as a continuous piece or edit it down to the continuous episode, and you would only stop and do music records for a part where a character would sing and therefore have to be in sync, where the music would be driving the rhythm. But here, the entire episode of 10 minutes and 40 seconds was one continuous piece of music. And I just was proud of it because it was, in a way, it was done backwards of other shows. The only thing to compare it to would be something like Fantasia, where Disney took the piece of music but that didn't have vocals. So in a way, I can't think of any comparison.
Now, musical theater has, I guess, a lot of influence. I mean, opera, I'm sure, it used to be the popular music of the 19th century. Are you very well versed in opera? Like, you mentioned that you had all the scores of Wagner.
Boy, you really did your research on me. Wow.
I guess the duality is symphonist versus operatic form. Are you very familiar with both, is what I'm asking?
Yeah. Well, I'm not an opera buff, and I don't follow the characters and the story. I know some of them, and I've read through the libretto, and I've seen a few operas, but more often I would have purchased the LPs and listened to the opera as a score. And even though I like hearing the voices, I'm as much interested in the orchestra symphonically. One of my favorite operas certainly is Wozzeck, and with or without vocals, it's just one of the most amazing pieces ever. And in fact, it reminds me of what Eric Korngold said about the first film scores, which he and Franz Waxman and Max Steiner, they were inventing the art form. And I think it was Korngold that said, these are operas without words.
Right.
Because leitmotifs. And yes, I do know the Wagner operas, and I have all the scores. And my fascination is how the orchestra tells the story. And I'm more interested in those operas than the ones that have set pieces with an aria and a chorus. And that doesn't mean that I don't love Carmen, and I love all the Puccini, but I'm most enthralled when I'm hearing the score tell a story.
You mentioned Korngold. I was so struck by the fact that King's Row sounds so much like Star Wars. It's amazing.
Well, actually, are you sure you don't mean the theme to Superman?
Oh, both of them, I think.
Because it's right out of there. In fact, with all due respect for John Williams, he really did kind of borrow that theme there. I read something interesting on the record jacket, the record label to King's Row, which was that Korngold wrote the main theme before he knew what the movie was about. He just liked the title King's Row, and it sounds very royal, but I'm told that the movie has nothing to do with that.
That's hilarious.
I also know Korngold's operas, Die Totestadt, and I forgot the name of the others. He's written several, and I have a couple of them. I even got an illegal Xerox of the vocal score, which is out of print.
Can I ask you, just to end off, a couple of really quick, fun questions? Who are your top 3 favorite composers and your top 3 favorite, I guess, orchestrators in musical theater, other than yourself?
In musical theater, top composers, well, there would be Sondheim, Maury Yeston. Well, anybody that I'm working with. Oh, Matt Sklar is my new favorite. And Andrew Lippa. Now, historically, there's, Gershwin, except for Porgy and Bess, I'm not into his songs because they're great musical scores. They're just great songs that are in musicals. So I don't put him in terms of musicals with the exception of Porgy and Bess. I know I'm forgetting some other important.
So like top three, like just classical composers. Just who
Oh, classical. Richard Strauss, Sibelius, Ravel.
Well, you mentioned Sibelius, and that's a name it is very well known in the classical sphere, but non-musicians might not know that person. So why is Sibelius great?
Well, I find his music, it's episodic. He doesn't find cut and dry endings. I like when there seems to be a drama that keeps churning on, and you get the satisfaction only at the end of very long stretches. And there's a lot of darkness, just like we were just talking about how the lighting in Scandinavia. You get those periods of darkness, and it really feels like it's in the music. I like dark music.
Now, I guess my final question now is, what advice can you give to somebody who wants to get into musical theater as either a composer or an orchestrator?
Stay away. Don't do it. And then if they must, then, advice. Well, if somebody gives you a referral or gives you a job, make sure they know that you're grateful. That's one thing. But also, then here's as far as practical advice. If you're thinking of doing what I've been doing, before they ask you, could you do an arrangement, do your studies first. And by example, I mean that at the point that I got asked to orchestrate my first show, which was Panama Hattie, I was 24. And I had put in a lot of years and read a lot of scores, and I've seen just the opposite. I've seen someone that plays piano and maybe conducts a little because they can wave their hands and the orchestra seems to follow them, and they get the opportunity. Could you do a chart? And they say, "Oh yeah," I'll kind of like go home and figure it out or do my best, or it's like I just think there's a lot of homework to do, and learn from the classics. And I wish if I had an hour, I would tell you some guiding musical principles, but I can't. Maybe on a different time. Go back to what I said before. Don't settle for a counterpoint that seems to be rubbing a little bit with the melody. Take your time and just figure out what's going to work perfectly, and sketch your ideas out early in the day before it's 3 a.m. and you get to the last big build and you haven't thought about what that's going to be, because at that point you're tired and you need to pull out the stops then and make it. You got to hit a home run. If you don't hit a home run, they're just not going to call you the second time.
Yeah, fantastic advice, and from such a great artist, Larry. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. You're really one of the top guys in the world. Can I ask you what projects are you working on for the rest of the year and next year?
It so happens that I'm working on 3. Well, I have 4 projects lined up over the next few months with a couple of breaks in between, and 3 of them are reductions of pieces I've done before. Hello, Dolly is going on the road, so I'm working on a revision of what we have on Broadway right now. And then the Prom, which had a great out-of-town tryout, one of the most amazing new shows. This is going to take over Broadway. The Prom is topical, and it's entertaining, and it's hilarious, and it's deeply touching. It's relevant, and the title sounds like it's just on the surface, but God, wait till you hear it, and wait till you see what the story is. It's wonderful, and you'll feel like you're flying on air at the end of it. The music, Matt Sklar, is amazing. It's Chad Beglin's. Did I get that right? Yes. Lyrics and Bob Martin, the book, and the stars in it. There's Beth Level, there's Christopher Sieber, and Brooks Asmanskis, and and there's Caitlin. I forgot her last name, but Caitlin, she's going to be a star soon, and also Angie Schwarr, all amazing talents. And I left out the director choreographer Casey Nicola,
It looks like there's a lot of buzz around it, so it seems really exciting.
and my friend Dory Berenstein, producer with Bill. Bill. Well, you know your last name. I don't have to tell you.
Well, listen, Larry, it's been such a pleasure. You've been you're such a great guest.
Oh, please. The pleasure was mine.
Well, let me tell you something. If it's too cold ever in New York, and if you want to come down to sunny Singapore, you have a standing invitation. You and your family. If you want to go to like a tropical paradise and have a good time, just come over here. We'll take care of you and just show you the sights, and you can get away from the winter.
Better watch out, because I just might do that. That sounds fantastic. There's a drink here called the Singapore Sling, which I don't even know what's in it, but I'm sure that the real deal is much better.
Let's stay in touch. I'd love to interview you again, because there's so much more. You have had such a huge career, and there's so many more shows I wanted to talk to you about. But let's leave it here, and have a great evening. And it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Larry.
Well, I'm very flattered. I mean, you by far overrate me, and it's really been a pleasure talking to you. Your questions were great. You're a great interviewer. Wow, I'm gonna
keep that in.
You're terrific, and I hope to see you someday.
Larry, take care.
Hope it's soon. Take care. Bye.